Get out! Your internet hobby is embarrassing me.
Are you sure?
Sir, you just ordered the property owner to leave.
The night my father ordered security to throw me out of his birthday party, he had no idea he was standing inside a building I owned. Then the resort director crossed the ballroom, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Sir, the property owner needs to speak with you." Every conversation stopped. "Hello, my name is Claire Bennett. I am 36 years old, and for most of my life, my family treated me like the daughter who never became anything important. This is the story of how my father tried to humiliate me in front of 200 guests and accidentally exposed the lie he had built his entire reputation on. My father, Richard Bennett, president, founder, chairman, community leader, he collected important people the way other men collected watches. If someone had money, influence, or a famous last name, what he did not want at his table was me. To him, I was the daughter who had wasted a business degree on an internet hobby. That was what he called my work. He never asked what the work involved. He only knew that I did it from a laptop, rarely wore a suit, and did not have an office with my name on the door. My younger brother, Grant, was different. Grant worked at Bennett Hospitality Group, the company my father had inherited from my grandfather. He wore expensive suits, repeated my father's opinions, and appeared in photographs beside him at charity dinners. My father introduced Grant as the future of the Bennett name. He usually introduced me by saying, "Claire does something online." For years, I let it go. Arguing with him only gave him another opportunity to explain why my life disappointed him. The truth was that my internet hobby had started 12 years earlier, when I built a website reviewing small hotels and mountain retreats. At first, only a few hundred people read it. Then a review I wrote about a family-owned lodge went viral. Bookings flooded in, and the owners asked me to help with their online strategy. One client became 10. 10 became 50. I built a travel media company called North Star Escapes. Later, I created software that helped independent resorts manage direct bookings. I sold part of that software company for more money than my father's business had earned in 10 years. I did not tell my family. That was not because I was ashamed. It was because I had learned that my father did not respect success unless he believed he could control it. 6 months before his 65th birthday, a lawyer named Evelyn Shaw called me about Mountain Crest Resort. Mountain Crest sat high in Colorado's Elk Ridge Mountains. It had stone fireplaces, cedar balconies, a ballroom overlooking a frozen lake, and more than 300 acres of forest. My grandfather had taken me there once when I was 9. I still remembered drinking hot chocolate beside the lobby fire, while snow covered the windows. But the resort had been losing money for years. Its owner had borrowed too heavily, maintenance had been delayed, and the bank was preparing to take control. Evelyn represented a quiet group of investors who wanted someone with experience in both hospitality and digital bookings. I studied the numbers for 3 weeks. Beneath the debt and bad management, I saw enormous value. So I formed North Star Mountain Holdings, invested my own money, and bought the resort. I kept the purchase private while we repaired the property and protected the employees. Only my legal team, the senior management, and the resort director, Elena Ruiz, knew that I was the majority owner. 2 months after the sale closed, my father announced that Mountain Crest would host his 65th birthday. He did not know I owned it. At first, I thought it was a strange coincidence. Then Elena sent me the event proposal. My father wanted the largest ballroom, luxury suites for selected guests, imported wine, a 10-piece orchestra, and a custom ice sculpture shaped like the Bennett Company logo. The estimated bill was $184,000. There was one problem. Bennett Hospitality Group had already missed payments to several suppliers. I knew that because one of those suppliers had contacted North Star about doing business with us. During our background check, my team found lawsuits, overdue taxes, and loans secured by properties that were worth far less than my father claimed. The company was not thriving. It was collapsing. My father was planning a spectacular party so people would believe he was still powerful. I told Elena to treat him like any other customer. No favors, no secret discounts, and no charges without written approval. Then, 3 weeks before the party, my mother called. "Your father thinks it would be better if you didn't come," she said. I was silent for a moment. I received an invitation. That was sent before the guest list was finalized. I'm his daughter. My mother sighed as if I were making her life difficult. There will be senators, investors, and important hotel executives there. Your father is worried someone will ask what you do. And what is he afraid I'll say? Her voice became softer. Claire, please don't make this painful. He says your internet hobby makes the family look unserious. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked through my office window at a live camera feed of Mountain Crest's newly renovated lobby. All right, I said. If that is what he wants. My mother sounded relieved. Thank you for understanding. But I did not understand. Not anymore. For years I had believed my father dismissed my work because he was old-fashioned. Now I realized it was something worse. He needed me to remain unsuccessful because my supposed failure made Grant look stronger. That night, Evelyn called with another discovery. My father had submitted a letter to Mountain Crest claiming Bennett Hospitality Group had $22 million in available assets. The letter was meant to justify putting the final event balance on a 30-day corporate account. The signature at the bottom belonged to a bank officer who had retired 8 months earlier. Do you think it's forged? I asked. I think we need the bank to answer that, Evelyn said. The next morning, we requested verification. The bank confirmed that it had never issued the letter. That changed everything. This was no longer just a father spending too much money on a birthday party. Someone was using false financial information to obtain credit from my company. I authorized a formal investigation. Within days, my accountants found a pattern. My father and Grant had used similar letters with vendors in 3 states. They paid old bills with new loans, moved money between accounts, and convinced investors that the company owned properties it had quietly sold. Then we found my name. 10 years earlier, my father had created a holding company called Claire Bennett Digital Ventures. The name appeared on loan documents connected to 2 failing hotels. I had never heard of the company. My signature appeared on the guarantees. It was not my signature. I stared at the documents until the words blurred. My father had not merely mocked my internet career. He had used it as a hiding place. If the loans failed, he could blame the daughter whose work no one in his circle took seriously. Evelyn advised me not to confront him yet. We needed records, dates, and witnesses. So for 2 weeks, I said nothing while investigators followed the money. The evidence led to Grant. His computer account had created the false documents. His assistant had emailed them, but the instructions came from my father's private address. My mother called twice during that period. Both times, she reminded me not to appear at the party. On the second call, she said, "Your father has worked his whole life for this reputation." I looked at the forged signature on my desk. Yes, I answered. I'm beginning to understand exactly how he built it. The day before the celebration, Alana informed me that my father had demanded several last-minute upgrades. He wanted fireworks over the lake and a rare bottle of whiskey placed at every table. When the event manager requested payment, Grant gave her another corporate guarantee. It was also false. We refused the added credit. My father became furious and threatened to have the director fired. Elena calmly reminded him that he did not employ her. He then claimed the resort's owner was an old business friend who would approve anything he wanted. That was when I decided to attend. Not as an unwanted daughter begging for a seat, as the owner protecting her company. On Saturday evening, snow fell softly over Mountain Crest. Black cars curved up the long drive, while golden lights shone through the ballroom windows. Included local politicians, bankers, hotel owners, and several people my father hoped would invest in his next project. I arrived wearing a simple dark blue dress and the silver necklace my grandfather had given me before he died. Elena met me in a private office. "Your legal team is in the conference room," she said. The bank representative arrived 20 minutes ago. Sir's attorney, and my father. He is telling everyone he plans to acquire this resort by summer. I closed my eyes briefly. Even then, part of me wished there were an innocent explanation. He was still my father. Some small, foolish part of me wanted him to see me, apologize, and choose honesty before it was too late. I entered the ballroom through a side door. The orchestra was playing. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished floors. A huge photograph of my father hung behind the stage beneath the words, "Lugi y, Ophelidar Saip." My brother saw me first. His smile disappeared. He hurried across the room and caught my arm. "What are you doing here?" He whispered. "Attending Dad's birthday. You were told not to come." I was invited before I was uninvited. But Grant glanced around nervously. "Leave before he sees you." "Why? Are you afraid I'll embarrass him?" Claire, this isn't one of your little online events. There are serious people here. I removed his hand from my arm. I know, I invited some of them. He stared at me, but before he could respond, my father's voice came through the speakers. He was on stage thanking everyone for celebrating 65 years of achievement. Then he raised a glass and announced that Bennett Hospitality Group was entering a new era. He said, smiling toward the crowd, "We are in advanced discussions to add Mountain Crest Resort to our portfolio." The guests applauded. Elena stood near the wall, her expression perfectly controlled. My father continued. He described renovation plans I had already completed and technology his company did not own. Then he announced that Grant would lead the acquisition. That was when he saw me. His face froze for half a second. Then the charming public smile returned. He stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward me. My mother followed, pale and anxious. "Claire," he said quietly. "We discussed this?" "No." Several nearby guests turned toward us. My father lowered his voice. "You need to leave. I only came to hear about your acquisition." His eyes hardened. "I'm not the one claiming to buy a property that isn't for sale." A Grant stepped between us. "Dad, I'll handle her." My father was already angry. He raised his hand toward two security officers near the entrance. "Remove this woman from the ballroom," he ordered. "She is disrupting a private event." The music faded. Conversations died one after another. The security officers did not move. Elena crossed the ballroom with slow, measured steps. When she reached us, my father pointed at me, confused. He said, "I told them to escort her out." Elena's voice was calm. "Sir, the property owner needs to speak with you." My father looked around impatiently. "Then bring him here." Elena turned toward me. "Ms. Bennett," she said, "would you like to use the microphone?" Nobody moved. My father gave a short laugh, but there was no confidence in it. "What is this?" I faced him. "Mountain Crest is owned by North Star Mountain Holdings. I am its founder and majority owner." For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. "Grant's impossible." Elena handed me a folder containing the ownership records. I offered it to him. "You can read them." My father did not take the folder. "This is some childish performance." "No," I said. "The performance was telling these guests you were buying my resort." Whispers spread across the room. One of the bankers near the stage stopped smiling. Two investors stepped away from Grant. My father looked at them and realized his reputation was breaking in real time. He moved closer to me. "Whatever you paid, I'll buy it from you privately. The resort is not for sale. Everything is for sale. Not to someone who used forged documents to obtain credit." Grant's face lost all color. My mother whispered, "Richard, what is she talking about?" He ignored her. "Be careful, Claire." I was careful. "That is why my attorneys are waiting in the conference room with representatives from your bank and your investors." The ballroom erupted into overlapping voices. My father grabbed my elbow. "You ungrateful little." The security officers stepped forward immediately. I pulled free. "Do not touch me again." Elena signaled to the audiovisual technician. The giant birthday photograph behind the stage disappeared. In its place appeared a simple timeline prepared by my legal team. It showed the false bank letter, the unpaid accounts, and the company created in my name. I did not reveal private account numbers or make accusations beyond what the records proved. I did not need to. The dates told the story. 10 years ago, I said, a company was created using my name without my knowledge. Loans were guaranteed with a forged version of my signature. Last month, another false financial letter was submitted to this resort. My mother covered her mouth. Grant stepped backward. "Dad told me Claire approved the old company." My father turned on him. "Stop talking."
"You said she signed everything?"
Grant shouted. There it was, the confusion, panic, and betrayal that arrived when two dishonest people could no longer protect each other. My father tried to regain control. He climbed onto the stage and reached for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a family disagreement being exaggerated by an emotional daughter." I looked at Evelyn. She opened the ballroom doors. Two civil investigators and a county detective entered. The detective was not there to stage an arrest for an audience. He was there because my father had ignored a request to preserve company records, and investigators had evidence that someone was trying to destroy them that night. Grant looked toward the exit. The detective asked him to remain where he was. My father's hand tightened around the microphone. His great celebration had become the one room he could not control. I walked onto the stage and stood several feet away from him. You said my work embarrassed you, I told him. But my work created jobs. It restored this resort. It paid its debts honestly. You were embarrassed because you never bothered to learn what I built. He stared at me with an anger so cold that, years earlier, it would have made me apologize. That night, it made me feel free. You're destroying your own family, he said. No, I'm refusing to let you destroy my name to save yours. The detective asked my father and Grant to accompany him to a private room. They were not dragged away in handcuffs. Real justice was quieter than that. It came in signed statements, frozen accounts, canceled loans, and people who finally asked the questions my father had spent years avoiding. As he left the ballroom, the guests moved aside. Nobody applauded him. My mother remained by the stage, trembling. She looked older than she had that morning. Did you know? I asked her. Not about the signatures, she said. I knew the company was struggling. I knew he exaggerated, but I thought protecting his image protected all of us. You helped him exclude me. Tears filled her eyes. I was trying to keep the peace. Peace that requires one person to stay silent is not peace. I did not hug her. I also did not humiliate her. I told Alina to arrange a car to take her home. The party ended early. Guests collected their coats while lawyers exchanged contact information. The orchestra packed its instruments. Staff removed the giant ice sculpture of the Bennett logo before it melted across the floor. I stood alone beside the ballroom windows, watching snow fall over the lake. Elena joined me. Are you all right? She asked. Not yet, I said, but I will be. Over the next 6 months, the investigation uncovered everything. My father had directed Grant to falsify financial statements and hide debt from investors. Grant cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence. My father eventually pleaded guilty to fraud and identity theft. He avoided a long prison term because of his age and lack of a prior record, but he received home confinement, probation, and a court order to repay millions. Bennett Hospitality Group entered bankruptcy. The remaining properties were sold, and the money went to employees, lenders, and small vendors before my father received anything. I sued to remove my name from every fraudulent guarantee. The court cleared me completely. My mother moved into a small house near her sister. Our relationship is careful, but at least it is honest now. Grant sent me a letter apologizing. I have not decided whether forgiveness belongs in our future. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as returning access to someone who betrayed you. As for Mountain Crest, it had its most successful year in 2 decades. We hired local workers, restored the hiking trails, and created a program that teaches small business owners how to use online marketing. We named the program after my grandfather, the only person in my family who once told me that curiosity was more valuable than status. On the first anniversary of that terrible birthday, I stood in the same ballroom before our employees. There was no giant portrait of me and no speech about my legacy. Instead, I thanked the housekeepers, cooks, maintenance crews, reservation agents, and managers who had rebuilt the resort together. After the celebration, I walked onto the terrace. The mountain air was sharp and clean. Below me, lights from the lodge glowed against the snow. For most of my life, I had wanted my father to say he was proud of me. I thought those words would prove I was successful. But standing there, I finally understood something. People who need you to be small will never celebrate the moment you discover your size. My father uninvited me because he thought I had no place in his important world. In the end, I did not need a place at his table. I owned the room, and at last I owned my name.